So now we are going for uh, the metrical romances. So what are the metrical romances? Just a minute, please. Okay, so what are the metrical romances? Meter is the romances which are written in meter, which are written in verse form, are called the metrical romances. And it was the time when metrical romances were quite common, and almost everyone of the people who knew how to read and write, they were writing the metrical romances. And the themes of the mythical romances were very important, and they are still important. They were related to King Arthur and the knights, and some of them were related to Sir Gawain. And I can write all these things, I think, for you on the whiteboard. Just a minute, please. Okay. Sir Gawain. It is not Sir Gavin, it is Sir Gawain. And King Arthur, King Arthur, and the knights. These were the two most common of the romances that were written during that time. And please don't disturb me with chats during the lecture. And if anyone has questions, then please keep it to to the last part. And I'm distracted by this because there are a lot of screens which are open right now on my computer, because I have to write on the whiteboard, and also I have to keep an eye on the on the Zoom app, and a lot many things. So King Arthur and the Knights. This is something that needs to be explained. And King Arthur was a king in the ancient times, uh, at that time, and he is known. There are many myths or mythological stories which are connected with King Arthur, and one of these is that the most established one is that King Arthur was the one who said that he will recover the Holy Grail. Holy Grail was the cup in which the blood of Christ was taken when he was crucified. And Holy Grail is very important for the Christians. And he said that he will recover the Holy Grail. And for this purpose, he established a group which was a group of warriors, and these people were called knights. And there is another important story about the knights, that the knights were used to sitting on their meetings when on a round table, and the round table was designed so as to establish the fact that none of them was the leader. They were all equal, and their leader was the king himself. And the knights are also known as the army of the king. At that time, they were the special fighters who were responsible for recovering the Holy Grail. And that is why a lot of romances were written about that time. And when we read Chaucer, he says a lot of good things about knights, which also tell us that knights were very much respected in the English people and in their own country. And Moreover, they were given the charge of they were given land, and they were given squires, they were given yeomen, which means that they were like the gentry at that time. And the idea of chivalry is also associated with knights, and it was associated with knights because the knights belong to the the class which is known by certain characteristics, which is known by bravery, which is known by kindness, and all the characteristics of knighthood can be seen in the character of knight of Geoffrey Chaucer. And about the romances or about the story of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. It is a very important story at that time. The story of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. It is a mythological story which includes a lot of romance, and also when I say romance, it does not mean that the love affairs. It means a lot of imagination and a lot of mythical elements and all that. And the most one of the important metrical romances was the quest of Holy Grail. And I have told you earlier that Holy Grail was a cup in which the blood of Christ was taken. And there is no Holy Grail present now. The knights never succeeded in attaining that cup, and maybe that cup never existed. It was just a story and just a mythical story. Then we have a very important writer in this era is Geoffrey of Monmouth. Geoffrey, uh, he died in the year 1154, which means that I think I should write this on the board. Uh, Sorry, Geoffrey, Geoffrey of Monmouth, like Geoffrey Chaucer. Geoffrey of Monmouth, and he wrote a literature history of England, and that history is named. It was written in Latin, and it was the history of the region of Britain. The history, the history of the region of Britain. It was written in Latin, and the Latin name was Historia Regum Britannica. It was the French, it was the Latin name. And in this story, in this history, there are a lot of mythical elements. There are a lot of stories which have no background, which are not known by the evidence, by the facts or by evidences. And these stories are just made up by Joffrey. And interestingly, it was claimed to be a very good book at that time, and all the people, it was very well known, and all the people knew it, and all the people studied it, and at that time, not now. And he was, and in this story, there is also an important thing which is very well known fact about this uh, history, is that William Shakespeare, he took material of King Lear from this history, from this book of history, and also Tennyson's poem uh, "Idylls of the King" is also taken from this history, and Sir Mallory's Morte Arthur is also taken from this history. So I think I should write the names because these are quite difficult ones. Shakespeare's King Lear, and Morte d'Arthur. Morte d'Arthur by Sir Mallory. It is lesser known, and Idylls of the King by Tennyson. All these works are taken from the sources of all these works are taken from Gregory the Monmouth, Gregory of Monmouth. But this is now regarded as a story, as a group of false tales, a history which contains false tales which had no basis in history, which and we do not know any facts about all these things. And then there there were some French works, as I told you earlier, that it was the French period and Norman period, and the literature which was written during that period was French, and the most important writers of this age are uh, Lemon or Legaman. Both of these names are of one person. Lemon or Legaman. Lemon or Legaman. And his he wrote in the 1200s, which is the 13th century. And another writer was Vase, Vase, and his known work was written in 1165, 55, and it is not the date of his birth or his death. It was date of the work which we know, and their biographies are not known very much. And we only know that Wace was the one who wrote who translated Joffrey's history into French. Wace was the one who translated Joffrey's history into Latin. Oh, sorry, French. Translated Joffrey's history into French. Okay, and Lemon. Lemon was the one. He is known as the first person who wrote in English. He is the first person who wrote in English. The first person who wrote in English. And sorry, uh, not this English, but the old English. Yes, the English like the Chaucer's. So let me just rearrange the whiteboard. Okay. So Lemon was the first one who wrote in English, and it was not a very established verse. It was doggerel verse, which I can say that the poetry at that time was not very well established in metrical form. It was written in rhyming, but it was not very much metrical. And he wrote history of England, or as that area was called by that time, history of England in rhyme or in verse form. And perhaps he chose verse because it is more easy to understand or more easy to remember. So he was the first one to write the rhyming history or the rhyme in English. And although this is uh, not purely a literary work because it is related to history, but still, because it was written in verse, it is known as the first book. And now this age is over. There is nothing more in this age. And now we move on to the age of Chaucer, which is very important age, and not a single point of this age should be missed, because there are a lot of things which are important and a lot of things which should be understood and grasped. So I am removing the whiteboard now, and I will share it in the group later on so that there is a bit of space. The age of Chaucer. The Middle Ages ended uh, around 1350, and it was the time when Chaucer was born, and that is why it is roughly known as the age of Chaucer. Although Chaucer was not very much influential right from his birth, but still it is called the age of age of. Uh, I actually mute it when there is a lot of background noise, and since I am not sitting in a studio, we have a lot of noise here. Uh, so uh, the Ages ended uh, around 1350s, and they remained till 16th century, 1500s. And the, this age is marked by a few things, very important ones. And I'm going to tell you one by one. The first one is the Hundred Years of War, and I will explain them later on. The Hundred Years of War. The second one is the Peasant Rebellion. The third one is the struggle of House of Commons. House of Commons is the House of Parliament, of English Parliament. The struggle of the House of Commons. The fourth is the War of the Roses. War or Wars of the Roses. These are series of wars. And then after all these turbulent things, there is rise of middle class, beginning of commerce and trade, and it was a time when we see Renaissance flourishing in England. It was the beginning of Renaissance, or you can say the foundation time of Renaissance, because the trade was flourishing, and there was rise of middle class. There was a much influence on learning, but still there were a few wars. There were bad things going on, and that is the reason that we can say that this era is purely Renaissance. But Renaissance was showing its fruits in Italy at that time. The other European nations were much more advanced than the English at that time. The English nation advanced only during the reign of Elizabeth, and after colonizing almost the whole world, the British are still now regarded as one of the powers, not the superpowers, but very important countries or very important powers in the whole world. And one important thing which I missed was the Black Death, which was the plague that ravaged through England and diminished almost half of the population of England. And it was much worse than the coronavirus. And as a matter of general knowledge, I would just tell you that before that time, before the age of Chaucer, there is an important document, a political document, which was written between uh, the few uh, people, which were written between the Celts, the Britons, and the Church, and it was known as Magna Carta. And Magna Carta was a failure. It did not succeed, but still, it is considered to be an important point in the political history of England. And it was Magna Carta was signed in 1215, 1215. And also, by this time, Cambridge University was started. The foundations of Cambridge University were laid, and it was the time of 1230. Around 1230, the University of Cambridge was chartered, and later on it was established. And there is a lot of propaganda going on that when University of Cambridge was being established, the Muslims were fighting each other, and this is a propaganda and also a wrong propaganda, a false, like many propaganda can be are wrong, and this is very much exaggerated because it was the time when the British and the European armies were already defeated by the Crusaders, and the Crusaders, sorry, the Crusaders were the Christian people, and they were uh, destroyed by the Muslims. And at that time, there were Baghdad and Iraq and Spain and all these countries, even the Central Africa, they were the hubs of knowledge at that time. And they were awarding degrees, and they were universities. And the first university, which is known to be the first Muslim university, it was in Africa. Timbuktu is the name of the place, and it is still known, Timbuktu, and it was the place where the first Muslim university was established, and it was far beyond that time. So this is the propaganda. And now coming back to the traits of this age, the political situation of this age, the first thing which I will focus is the 100 Years of War with France. And this war, interestingly, was fought between. The interesting fact is that the Normans, who were now ruling the England, they were originally the French people, and later on, when their power rose, they became strong, and they started fighting with French. And as you know, that the Normans were Viking, and were mixture of Vikings and the French. They were fighters, and now they became the people of England. The nationalism, which we which we will see in the age of Renaissance, it was being the foundation of that nationalism was being laid during this time. The Normans, it was the time when Normans, the Anglo-Saxons, the Danes, and the Britons, and including the Celts, all the peoples who were living, when I say peoples, I mean different nations. All the nations or peoples, when they were living in England, they came together and lodged a fight against France. And now all the people who were the rulers or who were the conquerors, the Normans, the Anglo-Saxons, and the Danes and Celts, they were fighting side by side with the original people, the Britons, and they fought with France for 100 years. And after this war, and during this war, the British people started hating, because when fighting is more than 1 or 2 years, hate spreads out. And the British people hated the French, and they hated the French so much that French literature, which was very much celebrated in the previous centuries, was suddenly left off, and the English people started establishing their own identity, and they started writing in English. And as we have seen that in the previous century or in the previous era, Lehman was the first person who started writing in English. And but uh, he did start writing in English, but people did not accept it as their native language. People were too much connected with the French and with the Latin because uh, the people of learning were the people of church, and the language of the church at that time was French and Latin. And it was much later that the language was uh, that the language became the language of the church became English. It was about in uh, 15th century or 16th century when the language of the church was converted into English, and it was no longer Latin language. The Hundred Years of War had its impact on the literary world, and which was that people uh, left off French writing and French literature. And this war started in the year 1338, before 2 years before the birth of uh, our poet Geoffrey Chaucer. And interestingly, Chaucer is the name which is taken from French, and the word Chaucer means the shoemaker in French, in olden French. Okay, so the second thing which I told you was the peasants' revolution, or the revolution of the peasants, or the rebellion of the peasants. The rebellion of the peasants as a background, and this background is connected to the Hundred Years of War. And I think after this, I will stop the lecture, but I'm going to explain the peasants' rebellion. The peasants' rebellion, the background of the peasants' rebellion was related to the Hundred Years of War with French. During this war, the people who took great interest and who took a great toll in the war were the people from the countryside. They were the yeomans. The yeomen are the people which you also see a character in Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. There is a character named yeoman, and yeomans were the fighters who fought with. They belonged to the peasants, and they fought along with the knights, and along with the squires. And when the war ended, the peasants felt that the war was won by the yeoman, and there was a bit of truth in that claim because the yeoman took a lot of part, a lot of interest, and they were very much uh, vital or pivotal to the English victories. And the peasants felt that everything was given to the church or the knights or the king, or you can say the government. And the peasants felt that they were not given very much. And that is why they launched a very organized rebellion against the church, or sorry, against the crown. But this rebellion was crushed, and it was brutally crushed, like all the peasant rebellions were crushed in the previous centuries. And but this rebellion, although it failed, but still uh, it proved fruitful in establishing the middle class in England, and it proved fruitful in establishing the House of Commons in the Parliament. So now I think I should stop because Azan is being called.